Deathworld by Harry Harrison. Chapter 20. Read by Gerald Frost. From the beginning now, Kirk said, and leave nothing out. There's very little more that I can add to the physical facts. I saw the animals, understood the message. I even experimented with some of them, and they reacted to my mental commands. What I must do now is track down the source of the orders that keeps this war going. I'll tell you something that I've never told anyone else. I'm not only lucky at gambling, I have enough psi ability to alter the probabilities in my favor. It's an erratic ability, and I have tried to improve upon it for obvious reasons. During the past 10 years, I managed to study at all of the centers that do psi research. Compared to other fields of knowledge, it is amazing how little they know. Basic psi talents can be improved by practice, and some machines have been devised that act as psionic amplifiers. One of those, used correctly, is a very good directional indicator. You want to build this machine? Kirk asked. Exactly. Build it and take it outside the city in the ship. Any signal strong enough to keep this centuries-old battle going should be strong enough to track it down. I'll follow it, contact the creatures who are sending it, and try to figure out why they're doing it. I assume you'll go along with any reasonable plan to end this war? Anything reasonable, Kirk said coldly. How long will it take you to build this machine? Just a few days if you have all the parts, Jason told him. Then do it. I'm canceling the flights that's leaving now, and I'll keep the ship here, ready to go. When the machine is built, I want you to track down that signal and report back to me. Agreed, Jason said, standing up. As soon as I have this hole in my back looked at, I'll draw up a list of parts needed. A grim, unsmiling man named Scop was assigned to Jason as a combination guide and guard. He took his job very seriously, and it didn't take Jason long to realize that he was a prisoner at large. Kirk had accepted his story, but that was no guarantee that he believed it. At a single word from him, the guard would turn executioner. The chill thought hit Jason undoubtedly, and this was what would happen. Whether Kirk accepted the story or not, he could not take the chance. As long as there was the slightest possibility that Jason had contacted the Grubbers, he could not be allowed to leave the planet alive. The Woods people were being simple if they thought a plan this obvious might succeed, or had they just gambled on a very long chance that it might work. They certainly had nothing to lose by it. Only half of Jason's mind was occupied with the work as he drew up a list of materials that he would need for the psionic direction finder. His thoughts plodded in tight circles, searching for a way out that did not exist. He was too deeply involved now to just leave. Kirk would see to that. Unless he could find a way to end the war and settle the Grubber question, he was marooned on Pyrrhus for life. A very short life. With the list ready, he called supply. With a few substitutions, everything he might possibly need was in stock, and would be sent over shortly. Scott sank into an apparent doze in his chair, and Jason, his head propped against the pole of gravity by one arm, began a working sketch of his machine. Jason looked up suddenly, aware of the silence. He could hear machinery in the building and voices in the hall outside. What kind of silence, then? Mental silence. He had been so preoccupied since his return to the city that he had not noticed the complete lack of any kind of psi sensation. The constant wash of animal reactions was missing, as was the vague tactile awareness of his PK. With sudden realization, he remembered that it was always this way inside the city. He tried to listen with his mind, and stopped before he began. There was a constant press of thought about him, and that he was made aware of before he reached out. It was like being in a vessel far beneath the ocean, with your hand on the door that held back the frightening pressure. Touching the door without opening it You could feel the stress, the power pushing in, wanting to crush you. It was this way with the psi pressure on the city. The unvoiced, hate-filled scream of the Pyrians would instantly destroy any mind that received them. Some function of his brain acted as a psionic circuit breaker, shutting off awareness before his mind could be blasted. There was just enough leak-through to keep him aware of the pressure and supply the raw materials for his constant nightmares. There was only one fringe benefit. The lack of thought pressure made it easier for him to concentrate. In spite of his fatigue, the diagram developed quickly. Maida arrived late that afternoon, bringing parts that he had ordered. She slid the long box onto the workbench, started to speak, but changed her mind and said nothing. Jason looked up at her and smiled. "Confused?" he asked. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "I'm not confused, just annoyed. The regular trip has been canceled, and our supply schedule has been thrown off for months to come. And instead of piloting or perimeter assignments, all I can do is stand around and wait for you, then take some silly flight following your directions. Do you wonder why I'm annoyed?" Jason carefully set the parts out on the chassis before he spoke. "As I said, you're confused. I can point out how you're confused, which will make you even more confused. A temptation that I frankly find hard to resist." She looked across the bench at him, frowning, one finger unconsciously curling and uncurling a short lock of her hair. Jason liked her this way. A Pyrian operating at full blast, she had as much personality as a gear in a machine. Once out of that pattern, she reminded him more and more of the girl he had known on that first flight to Pyrrhus. He wondered if it was possible to really get across to her what he meant. "I'm not being mean when I say confused, Maida. With your background, you couldn't be any other way. You have an insular personality. Admittedly, Pyrrhus is an unusual island with a lot of high-powered problems that you're an expert at solving. That doesn't make it any less of an island. When you face a cosmopolitan problem, you are confused, or even worse, when your island problems are put into bigger context. That's like playing your own game, only having the rules change constantly as you go along." "You're talking nonsense," she snapped at him. "Pyrrhus isn't an island, and battling for survival definitely is not a game." "I'm sorry," he said. "I was using a figure of speech, perhaps badly chosen at that. Let me put the problem in more concrete terms. Take an example. Suppose I were to tell you that over there, hanging from the doorframe, was a stingwing." Maida's gun was pointing at the doorframe before he finished the last word. There was a crash as the guard's chair went over. He had jumped from half-doze to full alert in an instant. His gun was also searching the doorframe. "That was an example," Jason said. "There really is nothing there." The guard's gun vanished, and he scowled a look of complete contempt at Jason as he righted his chair and dropped back into it. "You have both proven yourselves capable of handling a Pyrian problem," Jason continued. "But what if I said that there's a thing hanging from the doorframe that looks like a stingwing, but is really a kind of large insect that spins a fine silk that can be used to weave clothes?" The guard glared under his thick eyebrows at the empty doorframe. His gun whined part way out and then snapped back into its holster. He growled something inaudible at Jason, then stamped into the outer room, slamming the door behind him. Maida frowned in concentration and looked puzzled. "It couldn't be anything except a stingwing," she finally said. "Nothing else could possibly look like that, and even if it didn't spin silk, it would bite you if you got near it, so you'd have to kill it." She smiled with satisfaction at the indestructible logic of her answer. "Wrong again," Jason said. "I just described the mimic spinner that lives on Stover's planet. It imitates the most violent forms of life there, and it does such a good job that it has no need of other defenses. It'll sit quietly in your hand and spin by the yard. If I dropped a shipload of them here on Pyrrhus, you could never be sure when to shoot, could you?" But they're not here now, Maida said. Yet they could be quite easily, and if they were, all the rules of your game would change. Getting the idea now? There are some fixed rules in the galaxy, but they're not the ones you live by. Your rule is war unending with the local life. I want to step outside your rule book and end that war. What, would you like that? Wouldn't you like an existence that was more than just endless battles for survival? A life with a chance for happiness, love, music, art, all the enjoyable things that you've never had time for. All the Pyrrhian sternness was gone from her face as she listened to what he said, letting herself follow these alien concepts. He had put his hand automatically as he talked and had taken hers. It was warm, and her pulse was fast to his touch. Maida suddenly became aware of his hand and snapped hers away, rising to her feet at the same time. As she started blindly towards the door, Jason's voice snapped after her. The guard, Scott, ran out because he didn't want to lose his precious two-value logic. It's all he has. But you've seen other parts of the galaxy, Maida. You know there's a lot more to life than kill and be killed. Like here on Pyrrhus. You feel it's true, even if you won't admit it. She turned and ran out the door. Jason looked after her, his hand scraping the bristle on his chin thoughtfully. Maida, I have a faint hope that the woman is winning over the Pyrrhian. I think I saw, perhaps for the first time in the history of this bloody war-torn city, a tear on one of its citizens. Chapter 21. Drop that equipment and Kirk will undoubtedly pull both your arms off, Jason said. He's over there now, looking as sorry as hell that I ever was able to talk him into this. Scott cursed under the bulky mass of the side detector, passing it up to Maida, who waited in the open port of the spaceship. Jason supervised the landing and blasted all the local life that came to investigate. Horndevils were thick this morning, and he shot 4 of them. He was the last aboard and closed the lock behind him. Where are you going to install it? Maida asked. You tell me, Jason said. I need a spot for the antenna where there will be no dense metal in front of it. Thin plastic will do, or if worst comes to worst, I can mount it on the outside of the hull with a remote drive. You may have to, she said. The hull is an unbroken unit. We do virtually all viewing by screens and instruments. I don't think... Wait, there is one place that might do. She led the way to a bulge in the hull marked for one of the lifeboats. They went in through the always open lock, Scott struggling after them with the apparatus. These lifeboats are half buried in the ship, Maida explained. They have transparent front ports covered by a friction shield that can be withdrawn automatically when the boat is launched. Can we pull that back now? I think so, she said. She traced the launch circuits to a junction box and opened the lid. When she closed the shield relay manually, the heavy plates slipped back into the hull. There was a clear view, since most of the viewport projected beyond the ship. Perfect, Jason said. I'll set up here. Now, how do I talk to you in the ship? Right here, she said. There's a pre-tuned setting on this communicator. Don't touch anything else, and particularly not this switch. She pointed at a large pull handle set square into the center of the console board. Emergency launch. 2 seconds after that, the lifeboat is shot free. And it so happens that this boat has no fuel. Hands off that for sure, Jason said. Now, have Husky here run me a line with the ship's power, and I'll get this stuff set up. The detector was simple, though the tuning had to be precise. A dish-shaped antenna pulled in the signal for the delicately balanced detector. There was a sharp fall-off on both sides of the input, so the direction could be precisely determined. Result The resulting signal was fed into an amplifier stage. Unlike the electronic components of the first stage, this was drawn in symbols on white paper. Carefully glued on inputs and output leads ran to it. When everything was ready, he clamped it into place. Jason nodded to Maida's image on the screen. Take her up and easy, please. None of your 9G specials. Go into a slow circle around the perimeter until I tell you differently. Under steady power, the ship lifted and grabbed for altitude, and then it eased into a circular course. They made 5 circuits of the city before Jason shook his head. Things seems to be working fine, but we're getting too much noise from all the local life. Get 30 kilometers out from the city and start a new circuit. The results were much better this time. A powerful signal came from the direction of the city, confined to less than a degree of arc. With the antenna fixed at right angles to the direction of the ship's flight, the signal was fairly constant. Maida rotated the ship around its main axis until Jason's lifeboat was directly below them. Going fine now, he said. Just hold your controls as they are and keep the nose from drifting. After making a careful mark on his setting circle, Jason turned the receiving antenna through 180 degrees of arc. As the ship kept to its circle, he made a slow collecting sweep of any signals beamed at the city. They were halfway around before he got a new signal. It was there all right, narrow but strong. Just to be sure, he let the ship continue 2 more complete sweeps, and he noted the direction of the gyro compass each time. They coincided. The 3rd time around, he called to Maida. Get ready for a full right turn, or whatever you call it. I think we have our bearing. Get ready now. It was a slow turn, and Jason never lost the signal. A few times it wavered, but he brought it back on. When the compass settled down, Maida pushed on more power. They set their course towards the native Parians. An hour's flight at close to top atmospheric speed brought no change. Maida complained, but Jason kept her course. The signal never varied and was slowly picking up strength. They crossed over a chain of volcanoes that marked the continental limits, the ship bucking in the fierce thermals. Once the shore was behind them, and they were over water, Scott joined Maida in grumbling. He kept his turret spinning, but there was very little to shoot at this far from land. When the islands came over the horizon, the signal began to dip. Slow now, Jason called. Those islands ahead look like the source. A continent had once been here, floating on Pyrrhus's liquid core. Pressures changed, land masses shifted, and the continent had sunk back beneath the ocean. All that was left now was the teeming life of that landmass. It was confined to a chain of islands, once the mountain peaks of the highest range of mountains. Those islands, whose sheer sides rose straight from the water, held the last inhabitants. Of those lost continents, weeded out descendants, the victors of uncountable violent contests. Here lived the oldest native Pyrrhians. Come in lower, Jason signaled, towards that large peak. The signals seemed to originate there. They swooped low over the mountain, but nothing was visible other than the trees and sun-blasted rock. The pain almost took Jason's head off. A blast of hatred that drove through the amplifier and into his skull. He tore off the headphones and clutched his skull between his hands. Through watering eyes, he saw the black cloud of flying beasts hurtle up from the trees below. He had a single glimpse of the hillside beyond, before Maida blasted power to the engines and the ship leaped away. I think we found them. Her fierce exaltation faded as she saw Jason through the communicator. Are you all right? What happened? I feel burned out. I've felt a psi blast before, but nothing like that. I had a glimpse of an opening, looked like a cave, just before the blast hit. Seemed to be coming from there. Lie down, Maida said. I'll get you back as fast as I can. I'm calling ahead to Kirk. He has to know what happened. A group of men were waiting in the landing station when they came down. They stormed out as soon as the ship touched down, shielding their faces from the still hot tubes. Kirk burst in as soon as the port was cracked, peering round until he spotted Jason stretched out on an acceleration couch. Is it true? He barked. You've traced down the aliens who started this war? Slow, man, slow, Jason said. I've traced the source of the psi message that keeps the war going. I found no evidence as to who started the war, and certainly wouldn't go as far as to call them criminals. I'm tired of your wordplay, Kirk broke in. You've found the creatures, and their location is marked. On the chart, Maida said. I could fly there blindfolded. Fine, Kirk said, rubbing his hands together so hard that you could hear the rasp of his calluses. It takes a real effort to grasp the idea that, after all these centuries, the war might be coming to an end. But it's possible now. Instead of simply killing off these self-renewing legions of the damned that attack us, we can get to the leaders, search them out, carry the war to them for a change, and blast their stain from the face of this planet. Nothing of the sort, Jason said, sitting up with an effort. Nothing doing. Since I came to this planet, I've been knocked around and risked my life 10 times over. Do you think I have done it just to satisfy your bloodlust and ambition? It's peace I'm after, not destruction. You promised to contact these creatures and attempt to negotiate with them. Aren't you a man of honor who keeps your word? I'll ignore that insult, though I'd have killed you at any other time, Kirk said. You've been of great service to our people, and we are not ashamed to acknowledge an honest debt. At the same time, do not accuse me of breaking promises that I never made. I recall my exact words. I promised to go along with any reasonable plan that would end this war. And that's just what I intend to do. Your plan to negotiate a peace is not reasonable. Therefore, we are going to destroy the enemy. Think first, called Jason after Kirk, who had turned to leave. What's wrong with trying to negotiate an armistice? Then, if it fails, you can try your way. The compartment was getting crowded as other Pyreans rushed in. Kirk, almost to the door, turned back to face Jason. I'll tell you what's wrong with an armistice, he said. It's a coward's way out. That's what it is. It's all right for you to suggest it. You're from off-world and don't know any better. But do you honestly think I could entertain such a defeatist notion for one instant? When I speak not only for myself, but for all of us here. We don't mind fighting, and we know how to do it. We know that if this war was over, we could build a better world here. At the same time, if we have the choice of continued war or a cowardly peace, every one of us votes for war. This war will only be over when the enemy is utterly destroyed. The listening Pyreans shouted in agreement, and when Kirk pushed out this time through the crowd, some of them patted his shoulder as he went by. Jason slumped back onto the couch, worn out by his exertions and exhausted by the attempt to win the violent Pyreans over to the peaceful point of view. When he looked up, they were all gone except Maida. She had the same look of bloodthirsty elation as the others, but it drained away when she glanced at him. What about it, Maida? He asked bitterly. No doubts? Do you think that destruction is the only way to end this war? I don't know, she said. I can't be sure. For the first time in my life, I find myself with more than one answer to the same question. Congratulations, said Jason. It's a sign of growing up. Chapter 22. And I think I'm going to leave it there, and we'll continue reading Chapter 22 tomorrow night.